Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. First issue of the year. I'm joined by my co-host Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, Happy New Year to you. Welcome back to the show.
Happy New Year to you too, Jacob. It's wonderful to be back and looking forward to another great year of making the case for liberty.
Yeah, hopefully this will be the last year we have to make the case, because we're going to achieve it by the end of the year. But in any event, I mean, after all, we've got a presidential election coming. I mean, our savior is about to be elected and installed into office, I guess, next year. So I thought it would be appropriate, since we're now officially entering the presidential election year, that we analyze the presidential candidates, to look at them, examine them, see what their positions are, and see what the prospects for liberty are if any of them are elected. Seems to me, Richard, that all these people are cut out of the same cloth. I mean, you've got a basic cloth that's denominated statism. And while there may be variations on a theme, depending on whether you're picking Hillary or Sanders or Trump or Bush or the rest of them, they're all cut out of the same cloth, in the sense that they all believe in basically the same paradigm, that they ought to be running the economy, they ought to be planning the activities of people, they ought to be punishing people for ingesting the wrong substances, they ought to be using the coercive apparatus of the state to force people to be good and caring. So I don't see much change. I mean, whether it's Bush or Obama or any of the current cast of characters, seems to me that regardless of who the American people elect, we're going to get more of the same. What do you think?
Well, unfortunately, you're basically right. About a month and a half ago, you may recall, and some of the listeners and viewers, I in fact did a piece on the presidential campaigning up to that point and the debates on television. It was a piece of mine that appeared on the FFF website. And I basically said is that we have basically a three-ring circus of candidates who are determined to do anything in their power to win the brass ring of winning the seat in the White House. But basically, one presents himself as a boorish buffoon. Another presents himself as a born-again saint. You have another person who says that they have been tough as a CEO and know how to set America right and to talk down the other leaders of the world, while others proceed to wax eloquent on how they've either been a governor or a senator, and that makes them experienced and qualified, as if a career in politics is a qualification or a recommendation for anything. Now, on the other hand, what do you have with the Democrats? You have Hillary Clinton, who clearly believes that affirmative action rules. It's her turn for a progressive woman who had to endure the abuse of a philandering husband, that she now has the right to the brass ring to sit in the Oval Office. And then you have some type of a throwback to the 1960s and 70s in the form of this other candidate on the Democratic side, who lives in a la-la land of socialism with a human face, and we'll all be nice to each other, and we just pass laws, and government can make a paradise on earth. This is what we're faced in this election. The core of the problem has to do with the fact, as you began with your opening remarks, is that all of them are basically variations on the same theme. The idea that the role and purpose of government is to be an interventionist welfare state redistributor, regulator, and controller, and that it is the duty, right, and responsibility of those in political office to micromanage and macromanage the lives, the societies, the institutions, the relationships, the activities of all the members of the society. Also, they all play this game of one-upmanship. The leading candidate in this Republican upcoming primary is someone who takes these views to the extreme. He wants to build walls and close us in by keeping people out. A Berlin Wall in reverse, if you will. And instead of shooting people as they go over the wall to get out, as in East Germany, he's going to do everything in his power to see that people don't come over, under, or through the wall. Then you have all of them taking this tough stand that they know how to manage the world. America has to be tough with other world leaders. It has to do nation building. It has to set the world right, because if we don't, the world will be against us, because we know they dislike us because of who we are. The idea that it is our own actions around the world that create resentment, anger, a desire to strike back, never enters these people's mind. It is a hubris, an arrogance, a presumption of knowledge and wisdom that is captured in the phrases of someone like the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, who referred to it as a pretense of knowledge, or the free market German economist Wilhelm Röpke, who long ago called it the hubris of the intellectual and the arrogant central planner. These are the dilemmas, and that's the mindset. So the fact is, to think that any one of them, whichever one ends up winning that brass ring and sitting in the White House a little over a year from now, that the world will be transformed, is basically a pipe dream. The only voice that has expressed certain rational views on a variety of domestic and foreign policy issues has been Rand Paul. But it is so clear from his low standing in the polls that his views, his interpretations, his understandings of a more limited role of government in domestic and foreign affairs is one that is too far away from either the establishment Republican Party or even the body of Republicans or even mainstream independents and Democrats in this country.
Yeah, well, even Rand Paul is not consistent, though. It's clear he would intervene less, but he certainly has not disavowed the concept of foreign intervention. He just wants to be more selective on where to intervene. It's clear that he certainly is better on civil liberties and privacy and NSA surveillance. But when was the last time you ever heard Rand Paul say, abolish the NSA, abolish all these massive surveillance schemes, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and all this national security nonsense? I mean, you never hear Rand Paul talking like that. So yeah, okay, he's a little bit better than the others, but it's still a variation on a theme. Better than the rest, perhaps, but certainly not the kind of society that we're talking about, and that's a society based on individual liberty and limited government. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that the point you're raising, now Rand Paul is the son of Ron Paul, and certainly Ron Paul is an advocate of an extremely, extremely limited and narrowly defined government, and certainly against the national security and surveillance state. I don't know what Rand Paul really believes or doesn't believe. The fact that no candidate, whether him or any other, can have any traction in either party in such an election by taking such a more principled and I would consider original constitutional stance that it is not the duty, responsibility, or the authority of the government to surveillance, regulate, control, intrude, intervene, et cetera, shows how far we are and unfortunately continue to move down an interventionist and collectivist direction outside of the founding fathers' conception of a limited and divided government.
Yeah, but I think his father, Ron Paul, garnered much more excitement, and I think he was higher in the polls because it seemed to me he was making a much more consistent case, the moral case against foreign interventionism and against the welfare state and the Federal Reserve than Rand is. It seems to me he was able to galvanize people within the libertarian movement or people who have libertarian perspectives to go to the barricades as compared to Rand. Rand just doesn't seem to me he's gotten people's juices up. And a good example of this is Ed Crane, the former head of Cato, established this PAC that raised over $1 million. I think it was around $1.5 million that he could spend on any candidates he wanted, and he intended to spend it on Rand, and he came out with a public announcement that was reported in the press saying that until Rand starts making a more consistent case for libertarianism, he may just return the money to the donors. But basically, I mean, you're right. The body of public opinion believes in this concept, and that's going to be reflected in the political process. So ultimately, it really is an educational task, the type of thing that you and I are devoted to, where we're trying to shift public opinion by attracting a larger number of people that are opposed to this way of life. And as our numbers grow larger, I'm convinced that we can reach a critical mass that then brings a shift. And as you know, all great movements in history have been led by a very, very tiny minority of people. And sometimes you can't see what's going on under the radar screen, but all of a sudden it surfaces, and it certainly did surface during the Ron Paul campaign. It's gone back below the radar screen again, but I don't think it's disappeared. But basically, we're talking about two different paradigms. The paradigm of central planning, of running the economy. I mean, this is what people want. They're out there excited about the presidential race because they want somebody that's going to run the economy. It doesn't occur to them that the better way of life is where you don't have government running the economy, where you don't interfere, you don't have government interfering in economic activity, where you have what we call in libertarianism and Austrian economics the spontaneous order, where people are planning their own lives, planning their own economic activity without government interference, where the sole purpose of government is to protect the exercise of this activity, but don't get involved with it. That's an entirely different paradigm. And so, unfortunately, all the cast of characters is of the statist variety. As you pointed out, these are the people that have what Hayek also called the fatal conceit, that I can run your life better. I can run the economy. I can run affairs in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and in the process use coercion and force. And that's the distinguishing characteristic here, that they have minimum wage laws that if you violate, you pay an enormous fine that's collected by the state, or you're put in jail if you refuse to pay that fine, or if you don't have the right ruler, like in Syria, we will bomb you and kill as many of your people as necessary to force you to submit. This is a bankrupt philosophy, Richard. As you know, it's gone on for, well, I would say at least since the 1930s, and really before that under Hoover. It's this philosophy of that government should be intervening in the economic activities of people, that it should be policing the world. And look at the horror story it's produced. I mean, everywhere you look, there's crises and chaos and ever-growing government intervention and ever-growing government debt. And then, of course, you've got the Fed that's inflating another balloon here. I mean, it boggles the mind that the American people still think that if they elect the right guy, he's going to fix this system. He'll never fix it. It is an inherently defective system. And until people realize that, we're going to keep going down this road to chaos, privation, recessions, depressions, and maybe even the biggest, one of the biggest economic crises and monetary crises we've seen in a long time. And a lot of people are predicting that.
Well, I think that the fundamental problem we face is somewhat parallel, not as straitjacketed as in other countries, but parallel to what we see in other countries where the government really imposes, like in China or Russia or the old totalitarian nations, a government-mandated and controlled curriculum in schools. So there's a party line of what people, from the time they enter kindergarten until they graduate at whatever point, they've only learned one position: the government's views and desires and beliefs about X, Y, and Z. And then the government's control of the media. There are countries around the world, tragically far too many, in which nothing gets broadcast other than what the government either directly or indirectly approves of. Now, we don't have that in that way. But the point is, we do have government education. And there's a wide parallel of similarities through the curriculums established through boards of education, about how American history is taught, what is viewed as a good president and a bad president, what have been important and right policies that our government has done for us, as opposed to bad presidents who followed bad or anti-people policies. And the same thing applies to the media. Yes, there's many new media outlets now, and the internet, you and I just doing this right now, demonstrates that degree of straitjacketed monopoly that had not existed before has been broken because of these technological opportunities that we have. But the fact is, you watch the network newses or CNN or Fox or Al Jazeera or BBC and so on and so on. And the fact is that what do they basically rely upon? Press releases and access to the officials in government and issued by government, so that in fact all the information we have, all of course is too extreme, but a vast amount that the average American or any citizen anywhere in the world gets is the information that their government either directly feeds to them or through the power of government in being able to issue press releases and giving reporters interviews and access to get the scoop on people. That affects the entire mindset that the world revolves around Washington. The world revolves around Paris or London or Moscow or Beijing. In other words, in those countries, everything revolves around what the government is doing and saying, plans, wants, desires, or is going to prevent or stop. And that mindset is the difficulty that we operate with, because everyone in the country then has their ideas passing through that sieve that the government has imposed in these direct and indirect, more mild and more extreme ways. That's the importance of breaking out of this through the type of things that we and others do with the internet, with webinars, with alternate news media outlets. This is the way. The optimistic aspect of this, and you and I have talked about this somewhat before, is that if you look at the surface, it seems that the state dominates, or the state mindset, the statist mindset, dominates everything that people hear, know, and believe. But the fact is that through the internet, through these alternative sources, information and news, discussion, debate, video access of things, there's this huge underground of people who are challenging the system. Now, some of them are on the left, politically, collectivistly, but the point is there are a lot of people, libertarian, classic liberal, more limited government, conservative types, all of whom are in this underground of the internet, who get their news, information, and their discussion settings through what now is broadly defined as social media. And that means that this is the avenue that we are having a chance to win and pursue, because there's far more of us than we are aware of on the surface. That goes back to your point from a few minutes ago, that it seems as if nothing can change, but a groundswell can occur, because I think that there are more people who are more concerned and are more aware than we are conscious of. But the fact is that there's a lot of work to do to fight this, because of the government's influence or control over education, and the government's either control or, like in the United States, through access and press releases, influence on the media, and therefore what the public hears, learns, believes, and understands.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the methodology. That if you go back to like the 1950s and 1960s, under the CIA's Operation, what was it called, Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA, it turned out, had actual assets in the mainstream press that were working for the CIA. And there was, of course, big scandal and so forth, but nothing happened. Nobody goes to jail for it. And nobody even gets their wrist slapped on it. It's just disclosed, and there's somewhat scandalous. So you never really know what the CIA is up to in terms of specific assets in the press. There's certainly no reason to believe why they would not continue such a program. But even if they don't, for all practical purposes, you've got people that are products of the public school system that believe in this paradigm of government control and government planning and government intervention that are now in the higher echelons of the mainstream press. And I think that's part of the reason why people are fleeing the mainstream press. It's boring. I mean, it's like as if it were an arm of the government and you were reading this government newspaper, that really the action is on the internet. Remember when you and I started FFF 26 years ago? For those of you that don't know, Richard was vice president of academic affairs for FFF from the beginning up for another 15 years until he became president of the Foundation for Economic Education. And Richard, when we started FFF, I mean, there was no internet. There was none of that. We just published our monthly journal, Freedom Daily, that's now called Future of Freedom. And we believed that we could disseminate the word by people Xeroxing articles they liked and sharing it with others. But the internet's been a real game changer in terms of the dissemination of ideas. As you point out, there's any number of people now that are advocating libertarianism on the internet, number of think tanks, educational foundations, just individuals that have their own blogs and so forth. I mean, that would have been impossible beforehand. And as you point out, there's people on both sides of the spectrum, and people like Stephen Kinzer, a liberal, that writes fantastic stuff from a libertarian perspective on foreign policy and foreign interventionism. And you've got conservatives like Andrew Basevich that does the same thing. He's a conservative, writing on the horrors of foreign interventionism and empire. So it really doesn't matter what a person labels himself at. What matters is the paradigm that we're promoting of non-interventionism, of dismantling the empire, dismantling the whole Cold War apparatus known as the national security apparatus, or what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And over here on the economic side, I mean, conservatives have always been fairly good on against opposing central planning and the president running an economy. I mean, they're not so good when it comes to the specifics like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. You know, the conservatives won't dare call for the repeal of those programs for fear of adverse public reaction. But there are any number of libertarians that are now saying, okay, that's the solution. Unfortunately, there still are libertarians that are calling for fixing these programs. But here's another good example of where ideas have mattered. The drug war. I mean, 26 years ago when you and I talked about legalizing drugs, I mean, we'd get this uproar against us on talk radio shows and so forth. Now it's on the table. People on the left and the right are calling for drug legalization. It's law enforcement agents, federal judges. I mean, it's now on the table, and I think we're going to see the end of the drug laws in fairly short order. I mean, so it goes to show you that despite the mainstream press, the power of ideas can have a tremendous impact. And I think ultimately that will be reflected in the presidential candidates. You will see people like Donald Trump and Jeb Bush and Rubio calling for the end of the drug war, not because they really believe it, but because they're just reflecting the public opinion and they want to get elected. And so that's why we continue doing what we do, not in the hope, not trying to directly influence the politician, but by changing the climate of public opinion, the politician himself will change.
Yes, I think that needs to be kept in mind. Someone once said that politicians do not lead, they follow. That the political figure wets his finger, puts it into the air to see which way the wind is blowing, then sees the direction of the parade and runs ahead of the parade and says, "Follow me," when the parade is already moving in a particular direction down the street. Now, that is what's so important. This idea that, electing the leader. No, everyone on that stage in these Republican debates or the Democrats with Sanders and Hillary, the fact is that the perspectives that they're expressing, the arguments and policy views that they say that they would implement, all of these are playing to their audiences. Now, why are they playing to this audience? Because that's what the people in the audience want. Yeah. They have accepted those premises. So if we can change the climate of opinion about what the average American and the ordinary voter believes and would want to establish, obviously not overnight, the country isn't going to wake up and say, oh yeah, let's have limited government like the founding fathers talked about with a real free market economy. But as opinions begin to change in our direction, a decriminalization of drug uses, and seeing that besides giving people freedom of choice without the threat of being imprisoned for what we call a victimless crime, you see a reduction in real crime because the street crime disappears due to the fact that drugs are no longer in the black market activity. Once you start seeing that and people start opening their eyes and, well, if it could work in that area, maybe it could work in this area. And the more the views start changing in a direction more like we would like to see, you will then start seeing the very idea that those on the stage start expressing different views because they're not really leading, they're following where the electorate wants to go, but giving the persona as if they're the ones making it happen.
Yeah, they're like the chameleons that are changing colors in response to their environment.
Yes.
Let me address something that you raised earlier in the show. about immigration and the war on immigrants, because they all, and put it in the context of foreign policy as well, because all of the candidates believe in waging this war on immigrants. And you've got now Obama engaging in this policy of mass deportation of Central Americans. And this thing's been going on for decades, this war on immigrants, and it really is disgraceful and it's despicable. But notice what they want to do in their paradigm, Richard. They want to unleash the federal government to go abroad, have omnipotent power to invade, occupy countries, bomb people, kill people, and just let the federal government do whatever it wants, no restraints whatsoever. And then they want to isolate the American people with these Berlin walls and visa restrictions and deportations. They want to build a wall around America's private sector, tariffs, trade restrictions, sanctions, and unleash the power of the federal government to go bomb and kill people. And then, of course, the bombing and the killing people is what causes people to get angry and want to respond with terrorism, which then gives them the reason, even more reason to say, we got to build a wall even higher to protect us from the enemies the federal government's producing. This is a despicable, shameful foreign policy and domestic policy that has really resulted in nothing but horror. Compare that to what the libertarian paradigm is. We want to bring the federal government home. We want to limit its jurisdiction here to the United States. We want limited government. We don't want unlimited government overseas, which is what conservatives and liberals and all these presidential candidates want. We want limited government, and we want to unleash the private sector to interact with the people of the world. I mean, my experience, Richard, from traveling around the world, and I'm sure yours is the same, people around the world love America. They just hate the federal government, and they draw a distinction there. At least many of them do. Some of them conflate them like Americans conflate them. But what I'm saying is let's do the opposite of what this current status quo paradigm does. Let's open up the borders. Let's have free trade. Let's have open immigration. Let's eliminate the sanctions and the barriers to trade, the embargoes and so forth. Let's just unleash the private sector to interact with the world. Let's bring the federal government home. Let's dismantle the national security establishment, and let's have limited government both abroad and here at home, and then have an unleashing of the private sector.
Well, I too have traveled around the world. I've talked to people in many different settings in both Europe and Asia, Latin America, and in general, they're friendly to Americans. Of course, they constantly ask me about this Hornberger guy. They're very suspicious about him. But every other American is okay, I guess. Anyway, but you're absolutely right. Most people, not all when you travel, but most people can make a distinction still between the average American citizen or person versus the government. Most understand that what the U.S. government does not necessarily reflect what every American believes in or wants. But if I can just talk about this, this idea of what has happened because of America's foreign adventures, it's worth recalling that this year, 2016, will be the 15th anniversary since 9/11 occurred in 2001. What has happened in the 15 years since that terrible and tragic and despicable terrorist attack? And that what it was, whatever motivated these people, whatever beliefs they had about America or their view of revenge, these were 3,000 innocent human beings going about their ordinary, everyday work who were killed in those two trade towers because of these evil monsters, right? There's no doubt about that. But what has the U.S. government done since that terrible and tragic event? They have now invaded two countries, Afghanistan and Iraq. They have proceeded to participate in the overthrow and the resulting unintended consequence of the disintegration of a third in Libya, and are now meddling in a fourth, Syria, with terrible consequences for the people in that country and the surrounding areas. At the same time as bringing destabilization, terror, and death and destruction to those parts of the world in the Middle East and North Africa, what has happened at home? If you could go back in a time machine, even 15 years, I have a feeling that we would be shocked and surprised by how much the surveillance, the security has intensified, that has disrupted our everyday life compared to what it was before September 2001, and which we now, after 15 years, take for granted and accept and lie over and play nice with the amount of security at airports, the degree to which the government presumes, if it wants to, and through their little kangaroo courts can get written permission from a judge to read every keystroke that we make on our computer, to go through our emails, to basically look into every detail of our lives under the suspicion that we might somehow be connected with a person or an act or an idea that they consider a threat to the security of the United States. This is so shocking in its magnitude and its pervasiveness compared to just a decade and a half ago, that we really need to stop and think about how these foreign adventures, after that terrible, despicable act on September 11th, 2001, how our responding foreign adventures have disrupted the daily life and security and privacy of the average American. We cannot lose sight of that.
No, and it's really the cost of empire. I mean, this was the turn toward empire that you and I have written about before, back in 1898, where the Spanish-American War, where America started to move toward foreign interventionism and acquiring colonies. And this is one of the prices of empire. And the American people have to ask themselves, is this worth it? Is having an empire and foreign interventionism really worth all the surveillance, the infringements on civil liberties, the enormous government, and, oh, by the way, the ever-increasing debt? As you no doubt know, Richard, today Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States, there's no other way to put it, as a direct result of the Spanish-American War in 1898, it's going to default on its bonds because it's deeply, deeply in debt. That's a lesson here. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to happen here, but it doesn't look good. But there's a lesson to be learned here, because every one of these presidential candidates is endorsing this out-of-control spending, where spending exceeds the amount the government's bringing in. And they just agreed to another budget deal where tremendous amounts of more debt. They just raised the debt ceiling again. I mean, what's happening in Puerto Rico, default. And what's happening in Greece, default. That's the road that this country's on. So that's another cost of empire, not just the surveillance, not just all the airport stuff and the different way of life that we're living now, where a government has the power even to assassinate its own people. We're living in a government where we're looking at the real prospect of a serious financial and monetary crisis here.
Yes, I think we should never forget the point that you're making, and that is empire does not come cheap. The British Empire in the 19th and the early part of the 20th century, just the British Empire before the First World War, this was not a profit-making enterprise. When the British government had to take over the East India Company, which had been a private company in India in the 1850s, it always ran budget deficits. The cost of policing and managing and administering the British Empire in Asia, Africa, and so on was an immense cost. Yeah, was there trade? Was there commerce? But on the net of the balance sheet, empire cost Great Britain. All that the First World War and then the Second World War did was to bankrupt a system that was not a going enterprise in terms of a balance sheet. Now, America, after the Second World War, took over the empire mantle of both the British and the French. And the fact is that slowly but surely, the cost and the burden of empire has been growing and multiplying, both in the freedoms that I was trying to emphasize a minute ago, most clearly since the 9/11 episode 15 years ago. But slowly but surely, this idea of the cost of empire, it most recently began, by recently I mean in our lifetime, when Lyndon Johnson decided to expand the welfare state with the Great Society programs and fight a war in Vietnam, right? America was going to have both guns, military adventurism, and butter, a welfare redistributive state. And that's when the deficits began in a major way in the post-war period. That's when the inflation began, when the Federal Reserve was printing the money to cover a good part of the deficit expenses of the government. Empire costs, interventions cost. We saw this also when the Soviet Union fell, and everybody talked about the peace dividend, right? We didn't need a heavy military. But what happened? Once it became clear that the defense budget would be cut And those in the Pentagon who rule the roost there would not have all of their little budgets to play with their war toys and their new versions of the war toys, suddenly become more willing and active to participate in the war on drugs through interdiction. And then we're obviously not sufficiently opposing the call by first Bush and then continuing with Obama with these various types of direct and indirect interventions abroad. And while Bush may have invaded Afghanistan and Iraq with boots on the ground, I think we should not forget that it is Obama who has brought this totally new dimension with drone wars, in which we now have a new philosophy. Yes, causes worth killing for, but not dying for, because you play like on the computer screen where you're thousands of miles away, but you direct the little toy on the screen to drop live bombs on individuals. And if innocent people get killed, well, let's remember, they're not Americans. They don't have a Bill of Rights. So it really doesn't matter. And besides, if you have to kill a bunch of people to get one bad guy, well, that's the cost of victory.
Yeah, I call it the greatest terrorist-producing machine in history. It really is a racket. It's how the federal government has adopted a new way after it lost its Cold War enemy, the Soviet Union and communism, to justify ever-increasing budget spending, growth, and so forth. But anyway, Richard, we're out of time for the day. Enjoyed the show, the first show of the year, and look forward to doing more with you. And Happy New Year to everyone, and we'll see you next week.